Oh, okay. Just keep it there. Okay. Wait till the computer finds it. You don't need this. It's going to be hard to find lectures. Oh, lectures. Oh, I clicked the screen. Lectures. 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 That's a shortcut. Yeah, it'll go to the, just click it. No, it'll work. It'll work. Trust me. Okay, and then Harvard Geospatial. Oh, we have it. Okay, and then there. I think we can just play it from there. I think it's quicker. I think it might take a while to copy. Mm-hmm. It's just put, yeah, it's a PDF. Full screen mode. Great. Hi, everybody. So I think we just had some really interesting talks that kind of brought up a lot of the issues about privacy and kind of how do we regulate it. I run the Civic Data Design Lab. My name is Sarah Williams, and I run the Civic Data Design Lab at MIT. And my research lab is really interested in how we can use data to create designs that tell stories about the places we live. And just to give you a quick example of what I mean by that is this map we made a few years ago as part of my research lab previous to coming to MIT, where we took data about where people lived before they went into prison and figured out how much it costs to incarcerate them, and then figured out these red blocks, it costs over $1 million to incarcerate these people. And the idea was to use this data to expose a policy issue that you might not otherwise know. These same neighborhoods have limited access to services that would prevent them from going to prison, job training programs, re-entry programs, healthcare services. And so the idea was to show the mass amount of money that we spend to incarcerate people and to use a unique data set to do so, an incarceration data set, which was a government data set for that. So today we were thinking about the issue of privacy, and I just thought it'd be important to actually put the definition of what it means, because I think kind of it's a changing definition in the current state. So privacy is the quality or state of being apart from a company or observation. It's the freedom from unauthorized intrusion on one's right to privacy. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, do we really live in a private world? We're leaving data traces about ourselves everywhere we go. When we use our cell phones, we are kind of sending digital information that's being coded, logged. Are we separating ourselves? Are we actually being private? We use our cell phones everywhere, and this data is kind of connecting us, but also connecting us to larger kind of private systems. When we swipe our credit card, we're leaving data traces about where we made our purchase, what we purchased about. When we use social media, we're telling people what we're doing, where we're doing it, why we're doing it. And so I feel like we're increasingly living in a kind of world that's not private. And I think there's a lot of issues around that that some of the people brought up. But in essence, we're kind of leaving these digital breadcrumbs everywhere we go. And I think this has become highlighted just recently when we looked at some of the outcomes from the Boston bombing. And a lot of people are starting to talk about, well, are we taking away our privacy rights by having the ability to kind of see in real time kind of surveillance cameras and also kind of the social media that was going on. This was one article that was recently put up. the Boston bombing privacy lessons just kind of expose the mass amount of surveillance that we have in the city, and really, I think people who are discussing this fall on both sides of the story, well, it's provides this huge public good in that we are able to kind of track these bombers in real time, but it also, are we really private anymore? So these kind of issues, and I think one of the things that's really hard in the age of kind of digital media, social media, is that there's kind of this double-edged sword to all of the kinds of kind of data collection that's going on. Kind of one of the clear negative effects is that some people were mistakenly targeted during the Boston bombing attack and kind of persecuted in a way that was very real time for them and affected their lives. And so how do we deal with authenticating kind of data in this kind of very real-time kind of situation? And I think that the Boston bombing really highlighted and can help us push kind of thinking in this way. I want to talk, though, because one of the things that I'm really interested in is that that there is this kind of double-edged nature to data and the data that we collect, and I really think that we should take our data back and use it for public good. So we talk about the kind of privacy issues, and I'm really concerned with them. And I think that if we, as citizens, can take our information back and show how it can be used for positive outcomes, we can kind of make a difference in kind of the policy arena around these particular data sets. And so when I say that, I'm going to go through a few projects where I'm talking about what I mean by this, so you can get an example. So I think one thing that we really need to do is take government data sets, ones that are hard to access, are easy to access, and visualize them to show policy outcomes. And so a really simple example of this, I think, is 311 data, where we're volunteering information. How many people know what 311 is, by the way? Okay, most people. So this is where you call to complain about anything in the city. Well, some people would call it complaints or ask for services. And anyways, you call, and when you call, that information is geo-registered. And you can begin to analyze that geo-registered information by the places that they happen. And one of the things that I did for New York City is kind of look at kind of the hot spots and the cold spots associated with call complaints. This one is in particularly looking at the sanitation department's calls for requests for services. And one of the things that I found is that the cold spots highly correlated to high immigrant communities. And so what that meant is that for some reason, these communities weren't calling to tell us about their services or the needs for services. And what the city used this map to do was to advocate for advertisements in these neighborhoods in the languages of those communities, and to actually kind of do kind of an advertising campaign around ideas of kind of negotiating city services. Because it's not just that the information about 311 was provided in the languages that they needed, but a lot of these communities were worried about participating in this civic way because of maybe their immigrant status. So the kind of New York City Department really kind of sent out an advertisement. The one anomaly is this is the Upper East Side and West Side, which I should mention. And the reason for cold spots there is usually one building complains for everybody in the building. So it's kind of an anomaly whenever we're looking at a Manhattan map. But I'm going to move forward because I want to kind of go through my argument. The next thing is I think that we need to use our ubiquitous data collectors to collect new civic data. So if we're collecting data all the time, and this is something that Kurt just argued with his students, we are collecting data all the time. We can't help it. But how can we transform that to collect new civic data? So one example of a project which I'm currently doing in Nairobi, and I'm going to just show a video to explain it.
Cities in the developing world depend on informal transport to provide access to jobs, schools, commerce, and healthcare. Yet citizens and their governments rarely have maps or data of these transport networks. Digital Matatus leverages the ubiquitous nature of cell phone use in these fast-growing cities to collect, map, and provide open access to data on these dynamic systems. We've started in Nairobi, Kenya, and once this open standard for data collection is developed, citizens and cities anywhere can build on top of it.
So the idea in this project is we're actually using cell phones to collect data about the Matatu systems. And Matatus are kind of the informal transit vehicles in Nairobi, and they're the main way people get around, but there is no information about where Matatus go, what are their schedules, what are the routes. And so we're using, let's see if I can click next. We're using cell phones to collect that data, and this is just an example of kind of some sample data from that data set, to really create open data about a very important infrastructure element in the city in which we hope to improve mobility. So the idea of kind of taking your cell phone traces and kind of creating it for a public good is an example here. And my third argument is that we need to take our data back from social media and reuse it to describe the places that we live. So we talk all the time about how social media is taking our data, but can we take it back and kind of repurpose it to tell us something new about the places we live? And so an example is, if you look at, these are entries in Foursquare in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, and we have the best bagels, we have the subway stop. We also know it's hipster apocalypse. Well, we must be in Williamsburg. But it's also creepy that you're in my apartment. All this kind of data is being collected on social media by the places that we're at. And it's really easy to access this data. I wrote simple processing code. It didn't take a long time. And I was able to write this code, and I actually hacked into the Foursquare and Facebook API and collected data about all of the check-ins in New York City. So that's when you check in and you say, I'm at Times Square, or it's creepy, you're in my apartment, or what have you. One of the things is the code was really easy to write. We had to kind of create some workarounds to get into the data set. But I think an interesting issue related to privacy is I actually called up Foursquare and Facebook and I said, can I have this data? And they said, actually, well, we don't really own it because we use Google Geocoder. So I'd rather you hack in and get it so that we don't have to deal with the kind of fact that we don't really own the geolocation of the data. So I think that was kind of an interesting component of this project. This is actually the grid that we had to send. So you send a latitude and longitude point, and then it returns all the check-in locations. So this was the grid that we sent the API to get this social media data. And this is just looking at the number of check-ins in the area kind of around Madison Square Park in New York City and Washington Square Park. And kind of the yellow are restaurants, kind of purple is nightlife, blue is shopping. But we did this in many different cities, and one thing I want to highlight, this is actually, we did this in Mexico City, and the reason I actually started to do this in many other cities is because I was doing work in Mexico City, but I had no land use data for that area, and it allowed me to quickly, while it wasn't complete, quickly get an understanding of the kind of dynamics of Mexico City at that point. Interesting, social media also tells us kind of much more personal kinds of things in the city. Right above Grand Central Station, which is here, is a lot of hell. But also we kind of can see here near Union Square that people are talking about kind of new trends, the Tron apocalypse, the Night Day apocalypse, over the snow apocalypse, heat apocalypse, Bernanke apocalypse, there's an Oprah apocalypse. So this kind of idea that we not just use social media to kind of represent traditional land use, but we can create kind of emotional data sets. My fourth argument is that we need to create policy that allows us to use the mass amounts of privately collected data for a public good. So we have kind of a lot of private data sets that have a potential for public good. But we have no policies that allow us to access this. And I think it's important that we do that. And just to give an example, is another project that I did in Mexico City, which was actually Telefonica gave me all their cell phone data records for the region around Mexico. This is just, actually, they gave me all of their cell phone data in Mexico. But I kind of specifically focused my research on studies around the District Federal in Mexico City. And one of the things that I did is I actually was trying to figure out how this data could help us better describe city systems. And so this is actually a map I created which shows the activity along major highways in Mexico City, and so the cell phone activities going into the center. This is just another kind of view of that, and this is a visualization that I created where I'm using the lines of the street to show how much cell phone activity was going on along that particular street. This is actually a video that a student of mine made, which I think might help better understand kind of how much data we had in real time. Not real time, but at every time of the day over the course of a year. And this is just showing what we might already know, kind of this activity of moving into the city center and that certain streets are being congested. But through this, we can actually create real transportation policies around those particular avenues or streets, knowing the kinds of traffic patterns that are going along those areas. This student actually related the data to air quality data on those streets as well, so you'll see that he actually kind of looked at how you could look at the pollution levels at the same time that you were looking at the kind of congestion coming in from the cell phone. So his argument was that you were trying to make a relationship between congestion and actual pollution levels, which we know are highly correlated. So I think that we really need to own the data that we put into the world. And if we're going to talk about kind of the fact that we're being traced, I think that we need to own it and repurpose it for positive outcomes. And so I'm just going to leave it that we should really take our data back and use it for possible public goods. Thanks.
Taking just 30 seconds. If somebody wants to ask Sarah a question, it's a good time.
What public good is not always a given, right?
That's true. What is a public good could be, it could be a whole conference on what is a public good. I think, I'm thinking about kind of possible, kind of thinking about advocating for the people on the kind of margins of kind of policy, and so allowing them to have a voice is a public good that I'm thinking about, but kind of allowing them to be at the center stage.